My name is Jack Morrison. I'm 35 years old. And this happened one fateful October when my two closest friends and I decided to chase a legend deep into the heart of Big Cypress National Preserve in Florida. I had been haunted by my own personal demons for years, and the idea of a road trip with a supernatural twist felt like the perfect escape, an opportunity to face the unknown while also facing the ghosts of my past. It all started when Sarah Caldwell, an earnest and thoughtful folklore enthusiast with a penchant for dusty library archives, excitedly showed me an old newspaper clipping she'd discovered. The faded article mentioned a tragic local legend about a woman known as the Cypress Widow, a spirit doomed to wander the swamps of Big Cypress after a terrible betrayal in life. Sarah's eyes lit up as she explained how the legend had grown over time, how whispers in the wind spoke of her sorrow and vengeful anger, and how recent disappearances had revived old fears in the nearby communities. Meanwhile, Eric Turner, our resident daredevil with a smile that barely concealed his impulsive nature, was already egging us on with wild plans and promises of a thrill we'd never forget. We piled into my aging RV, a battered yet trusty vehicle that had seen more miles than any of us cared to count, and set off on the long, winding road toward Blackwater Hollow, a remote area near an abandoned ranger station reputed to be the epicenter of the curse. I was both excited and anxious. The idea of delving into the heart of darkness was intoxicating, yet the nagging thought that something might be terribly, inexplicably wrong kept me awake at night. Our journey took us through endless stretches of asphalt that eventually gave way to narrow gravel roads. Early on, our luck seemed fine. However, as we neared the outskirts of the preserve, the RV began to protest. The engine coughed and stuttered as we ascended a particularly steep, muddy trail, and the GPS started glitching, leading us in circles rather than straight toward our destination. I couldn't help but feel that our failing equipment was a bad omen, a sign that the wilderness might be intent on swallowing us whole. That first night in the preserve was unusually still. We parked near a clearing surrounded by towering cypress trees, their limbs reaching out like skeletal arms against the dusky sky. The air was heavy with humidity, and a strange silence hung over the camp, a silence that seemed to throb with anticipation. I sat in the dim light of the RV, tinkering with the engine while Sarah leafed through a battered notebook of folklore, and Eric joked about our misfortune with a careless bravado that belied his growing unease. It wasn't long before the eerie began. As dusk settled, the RV radio, which had been silent all evening, suddenly burst into static. Amid the crackle, I thought I heard faint, almost indecipherable whispers, words that seemed to form a warning, repeated over and over. I glanced at Sarah, who was scribbling down notes, her brow furrowed in concentration. "Do you hear that?" I asked, my voice uncharacteristically low. She nodded, her eyes wide. "It's like someone's trying to tell us something," she murmured. Eric, leaning back in his seat with a wry smile, said, "Probably just interference. We're in the middle of nowhere, remember?" But the whispers persisted, growing louder and more insistent with every passing minute. I couldn't shake the feeling that they weren't coming from the radio at all, but from the very air around us. Later that night, as I lay in the narrow berth of the RV, sleep eluded me. I could hear soft moans and the rustle of leaves outside, sounds that didn't quite match the gentle sigh of a warm Florida night. Outside, my eyes caught sight of something moving at the edge of the light, a shadow that seemed to shift and waver as if struggling against an unseen force. The next morning, we set out on foot to inspect some mysterious tracks that led from the RV into the denser part of the swamp. The tracks were odd, too deliberate, almost as if they were meant to guide us somewhere. The ground was slick with recent rain, and the air was thick with the scent of decaying vegetation and stagnant water. As we followed the trail, the tension between us was palpable. I could sense Eric's excitement bordering on recklessness, and Sarah's careful, measured observations only added to the growing unease that something wasn't right. Our journey took us deeper into the wilderness, past gnarled cypress trunks draped in Spanish moss, and into a maze of trails that seemed to twist back on themselves. Every so often, the oppressive silence was broken by distant, sorrowful sounds, a low moan that resonated from somewhere in the swamp, echoing off the trees. At one point, I swear I saw a figure at the edge of my vision, a woman in a tattered white dress, her face obscured by a veil of shadows. I called out, but when I turned, she had vanished, leaving behind nothing but a lingering chill. That night, with the RV now encircled by the dense canopy of the swamp, our uneasy mood reached a fever pitch. The rain began in earnest, a torrential downpour that soaked us to the bone and turned the muddy ground into a quagmire. The faulty engine and broken GPS meant that our RV was more of a stranded relic than a dependable vehicle, forcing us to take shelter inside it. Huddled together in the dim interior, we listened as the wind howled and the rain pounded on the roof like a relentless barrage. The whispers returned, now unmistakably close, as if circling around us, taunting our very souls. I remember Eric's voice cutting through the storm, half mocking, half panicked. Maybe we should just admit defeat and call it a night. Sarah, ever the scholar, insisted that the phenomena were connected to the legend of the Cypress Widow. There's a story, she said, her voice trembling with a mix of excitement and dread, of a woman who was betrayed and left to die in these swamps. Her spirit never found peace, and now she roams these woods, luring unsuspecting souls into her domain. I wanted to dismiss her as overly imaginative, but the evidence around us was hard to ignore. The next day, our attempts to repair the RV were thwarted by the relentless weather and the worsening condition of the vehicle. With no other choice, we decided to leave the RV behind and continue on foot. Our destination was Blackwater Hollow, a name that sent a shiver down my spine, for it was said to be the epicenter of the curse. We packed only the essentials, our hearts heavy with both fear and determination, and ventured into the swamp's labyrinthine paths. The trek was arduous. Every step was a battle against sinking mud and unseen hazards. At one point, as we navigated a narrow, winding trail between dense stands of cypress, Eric slipped near the edge of a murky pond, his foot snagging on a hidden root. For a terrifying moment, I thought he would plunge into the water, and instinctively, I lunged forward to catch him. The near miss left us all shaken. Even Eric, who usually wore his fear like a badge of honor, was visibly rattled. As twilight approached once more, the swamp transformed into a surreal, nightmarish landscape. The dense foliage seemed to close in around us, and the only light came from our faltering flashlights and the occasional sickly glow of fireflies. We stumbled upon a decrepit chapel, half swallowed by vines and decay, its once proud structure now a forlorn relic of a forgotten past. Its broken, stained glass windows cast fractured, eerie patterns on the ground. Sarah's eyes lit up with a mixture of wonder and horror as she examined the faded inscriptions on the weathered stone. This place, it might have been a sanctuary once, but now it feels like a tomb, she whispered. Inside the chapel, we discovered remnants of old rituals, a rusted iron candelabra, a small pile of dried herbs, and even a tattered book of prayers that seemed to have been abandoned in haste. The atmosphere was suffocating, heavy with the scent of decay and lost hope. It was there, amid the echoes of past sorrow, that I first truly understood the depth of the curse we were entangled with. The Cypress Widow was not merely a ghost story. She was a vengeful presence born of human suffering and betrayal, doomed to relive her tragedy over and over. That night, after seeking shelter in the ruined chapel, our sleep was tormented by nightmares. I dreamt of a woman with eyes like burning coals, her face twisted in anguish, reaching out to me with skeletal hands. In my dream, she whispered secrets of a betrayal so profound that it echoed in the very fabric of the swamp. I awoke in a cold sweat, the echoes of her lament lingering in my mind. The following day, determined to understand the curse and find a way to break it, Sarah led us to the abandoned ranger station at Blackwater Hollow. The building was a relic from another time, its wooden structure creaking under the weight of years and neglect. Inside, we found old journals and faded photographs that chronicled a series of disappearances and unexplained phenomena. One journal, in particular, belonged to a ranger who had once guarded these lands, and it detailed the story of a woman who had been wronged by those she trusted. a woman whose spirit was said to bring doom to any who dared disturb her resting place. Eric's usual levity had evaporated, replaced by a grim seriousness that matched my own growing dread. "I never thought I'd see something like this," he said quietly as he leafed through the journal, his hands shaking slightly. "This isn't just some ghost story. It's a curse, and it's real." Sarah, ever the beacon of cautious hope, suggested that we might be able to appease the spirit through a ritual. She had been researching indigenous symbols and traditional charms that were said to hold power over restless souls. According to the journal, a ritual might calm the wrath of the Cypress widow, offering her the closure she so desperately needed. But the idea of performing such a ritual in the heart of the haunted swamp filled me with both determination and a sense of impending doom. By the time we agreed to attempt the ritual, our group had been pushed to the brink. The constant stress, the relentless weather, and the ever-looming presence of the supernatural had frayed our nerves to the point of near breakdown. Old grievances, long buried under years of friendship, began to resurface. Eric and I clashed over every decision, his impulsiveness often pitted against my methodical caution. Sarah, trying to mediate, found herself caught in the middle of our mounting frustrations. In one heated moment, as we argued about whether to continue deeper into the swamp or retreat to the relative safety of the RV, I shouted, "We can't let our fear tear us apart now. If we lose each other here, we're as good as lost." The words hung in the air, a desperate plea for unity in the face of a terror that was already consuming us. With heavy hearts and minds weighed down by the enormity of what lay ahead, we set off toward the heart of Blackwater Hollow on foot. The swamp around us was alive with unseen dangers, sudden sinkholes, alligator-infested waters, and the constant, oppressive presence of the supernatural. Every rustle in the underbrush, every snapping twig, sent our hearts racing. We passed a gnarled, dead tree that local lore said marked the site of the Cypress widow's last stand, a tree whose bark was scarred by deep, deliberate gouges, as if someone had tried to etch a message into its very being. The sight made me shudder, and for a moment I could almost hear the faint echoes of a woman's lament. As night fell, we reached a small clearing that seemed to pulse with an otherworldly energy. The air was heavy and still, and an almost tangible silence enveloped us. Sarah set up a small circle using relics and symbols she had salvaged. A faded photograph of a woman who might have been the original victim of the curse, a charm carved with indigenous symbols, and several old newspaper clippings detailing the tragic history of the Cypress widow. "This is our best hope," she whispered, her eyes glistening with both hope and fear. "We have to try to give her the closure she never received in life." I nodded, though the weight of the moment pressed down on me like a physical burden. In that clearing, under a moon shrouded by swirling mists, we prepared for the ritual. The air vibrated with an eerie energy as I stood guard, my flashlight scanning the dark perimeter for any sign of movement. Every sound, every rustle, felt amplified in the oppressive darkness. Eric, his usual bravado replaced by a palpable terror, paced nervously, while Sarah began reciting incantations from the journal, her voice steady despite the fear that danced in her eyes. The words seemed to weave into the very fabric of the night, merging with the sounds of the swamp until they became indistinguishable from the wind. Then, as if summoned by our collective desperation, the Cypress widow appeared. She emerged from the darkness like a sorrowful apparition, a spectral figure in a tattered white dress, her eyes reflecting centuries of grief and rage. For a moment, time itself seemed to freeze as I stared into those eyes, feeling the full weight of her tragic past. She moved with a grace that belied the torment in her expression, gliding silently toward our circle. I could see the pain etched into every line of her ghostly face, and in that moment the legend became all too real. The spirit's presence was both mesmerizing and terrifying. As Sarah continued her incantation, I felt a cold, insidious force press against me, as if the very air were trying to choke the life out of me. Eric cried out as a sharp, almost tangible force slammed into him, and I rushed to pull him back, our screams echoing through the still night. The Cypress widow's voice, a mournful wail, seemed to emanate from everywhere and nowhere at once, and the ground beneath our feet trembled as if reacting to her unleashed fury. In the chaos, it became clear that the spirit was not merely a passive observer, but a dangerous, violent force. The wind carried her anguished screams, and objects in our circle began to levitate, thrown about as if by an unseen hand. For a heart-stopping moment, I thought we might not survive the night. I could see Eric's eyes fill with terror as he tried to stand against the spectral onslaught, and I felt an overwhelming urge to protect them both, to fight back against a curse that had haunted these lands for far too long. I forced myself to focus on the ritual, to channel every ounce of will into breaking through the malevolent energy that threatened to consume us. Sarah's voice grew louder, and I repeated the incantations in a desperate bid to bridge the gap between our world and the tortured spirit before us. I could feel the spirit's power waning as she hesitated, caught between the pull of her unfulfilled past and the force of our collective determination. Then, in a moment of horrifying clarity, I realized that the curse was not solely the spirit's burden. It was also a mirror, reflecting the unresolved pain and fears within each of us. The final act of the ritual demanded that we confront our own inner demons, to transform our terror into a force that could break the cycle of vengeance. I closed my eyes and recalled the memories I had long tried to bury, the loss, the regret, the moments of helplessness. With every heartbeat, I summoned the strength to accept those truths, to let them fuel my determination rather than weaken my resolve. As I opened my eyes, the swamp seemed to exhale, a long, mournful sigh that reverberated in the pit of my stomach. The Cypress Widow's form wavered, her anguish giving way to something that resembled resignation. For what felt like an eternity, we stood in that liminal space between life and death, our fates intertwined with the spirit's own tragic destiny. Then, as the final words of the incantation left our lips, a blinding flash of light erupted from the clearing, and the oppressive force that had held us captive seemed to shatter like glass. When the light receded, the Cypress Widow was gone. In her place, there was only the echo of her sorrow, a lingering silence that filled the swamp. We stood there, panting and trembling, the aftermath of our confrontation leaving us both physically and emotionally drained. Eric slumped against a nearby tree, his usual cockiness replaced by a quiet, haunted vulnerability, while Sarah clutched the relics close, tears streaming down her face as she whispered, "I hope she's finally at peace now." We made our way back to the remnants of our RV, the once reliable vehicle now a symbol of both our ordeal and our desperate will to survive. The morning light crept over the swamp, its golden rays struggling to penetrate the dense canopy of cypress and Spanish moss. The silence of the night had given way to a fragile hope, yet there was no mistaking the scars that the encounter had left on all of us. I could feel the weight of our shared experience in every step I took, the knowledge that we had come face to face with a power that transcended mortal understanding. Driving away from Blackwater Hollow, the RV sputtered to life as if by a miracle, and I couldn't help but glance back at the dark, brooding silhouette of the swamp. In the rearview mirror, for a brief, almost imperceptible moment, I saw a shadow flicker among the trees, a final silent reminder that some curses linger long after the physical threat has passed. Even as we left that haunted place behind, I knew that the memory of that night, the terror and the bittersweet catharsis of our final confrontation, would remain with us forever. In the days that followed, our return to normalcy proved elusive. The supernatural encounter had shattered not only the curse that bound the Cypress Widow, but also the carefully constructed walls of our own inner lives. Eric, who had once been so eager for danger, found himself quieter, introspective, and burdened by the knowledge that his own recklessness had nearly cost us our lives. Sarah immersed herself further in the study of local legends, her curiosity now tempered by the weight of first-hand experience. As for me, I carried with me a renewed sense of purpose and a deeper understanding of the fine line between human frailty and supernatural horror. Looking back, I realized that our journey into Big Cypress National Preserve was more than just an adventure. It was a reckoning with forces both external and within ourselves. The Cypress Widow, with all her sorrow and rage, was a manifestation of the unhealed wounds that we all carry. By confronting her, we were forced to confront our own vulnerabilities, our hidden regrets, and the darkness that lies beneath even the most steadfast exteriors. That night, as I sit in my quiet home far from the humid mists of the swamp, I still hear the echoes of that distant wail, the ghostly murmur of the wind through the cypress trees. I remember the terror in Eric's eyes, the trembling determination in Sarah's voice, and the moment when, together, we turned our fear into something powerful enough to break an ancient curse. Though the experience left us scarred, it also left us irrevocably changed, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit in the face of the inexplicable. I sometimes wonder if the Cypress Widow truly found peace that night, or if she merely faded into the mists, waiting for another unsuspecting soul to disturb her eternal lament. But whether she rests in sorrow or continues to roam the murky depths of Big Cypress, one thing is certain: that encounter remains etched into my very soul. And as I move forward, I carry the weight of that night, a reminder that the supernatural isn't always confined to the realm of legends, and that sometimes the most frightening encounters are the ones that force us to confront ourselves. My journey through that haunted swamp taught me that fear is not merely an enemy to be vanquished, but a force that can reveal truths hidden in the darkness. It taught me that when faced with the unknown, we must find the courage to acknowledge our own imperfections and vulnerabilities. And above all, it reminded me that sometimes the only way to break a curse is to let go of the past, to accept the pain and loss as part of the human experience, and to forge ahead with the quiet strength of those who have stared into the abyss and found the will to live. In the end, our adventure in Blackwater Hollow was both a battle and a healing, a journey that took us to the edge of despair and brought us back with a deeper understanding of the forces that shape our lives. Even now, as I recall every detail, with a mix of awe and terror, I am grateful for the lesson learned in that haunted corner of Florida. For in the face of unspeakable horror, we discovered that our greatest weapon was not fear itself, but the unyielding power of our unity and our willingness to confront the darkness head on. And so, as I drive away from those haunted memories, the humid air of Florida replaced by the cool certainty of daylight, I know that some nights I will still hear the echoes of a sorrowful wail and see, in a fleeting moment, the ghostly image of a woman in a tattered white dress. But I also know that I survived, and that in surviving I found a part of myself I never knew existed. My name is Jack Morrison, and while I may carry the scars of that cursed night, I also carry the strength to face whatever may come next, even if it lurks in the shadows of the unknown. My name is Miles Everett. I'm 42 years old, and this happened last summer when I left Miami behind in search of solace and answers in the remote stretches of the Florida Keys. I had spent years as an investigative journalist chasing down stories that left me both celebrated and broken, but one case, one that ended in a tragic unsolved mystery, still haunted me. Seeking both redemption and a way to finally put that painful chapter behind me, I traded my hectic city life for the solitude of an old RV and hit the long, winding road toward Bahia Honda State Park. From the moment I started my journey, the RV, once a reliable partner in my adventures, began to show its age. The engine coughed and sputtered as if protesting each mile, and the GPS, which had always been my guiding star, blinked in and out of service. At first, I chalked it up to mere wear and tear, but as the miles passed and the neon glare of Miami faded into the rearview mirror, I couldn't shake the unsettling feeling that fate was setting the stage for something far more sinister. I remember the early part of the drive vividly. The highways melted into a series of deserted back roads lined with relics of forgotten motels and roadside diners. It was during one of these stretches that I stumbled upon an abandoned RV campsite. The scene was almost surreal. A scattered collection of belongings half buried in the dust, a rusted grill sitting forlornly under the scorching sun, and, most disturbingly, a handwritten note pinned to a battered thermos. The note, scrawled in faded ink, contained a few cryptic lines that sent a chill down my spine. It mentioned a missing person, a case I had once been deeply involved in, and hinted at secrets that someone clearly wanted to keep buried. Along with the note was a grainy photograph of a young woman whose eyes seemed to look right through me, accusingly. I drove on in a daze, my mind racing back to the case that had once defined my career. It was a story of betrayal, cover-ups, and a desperate search for justice that ended in heartbreak. The memory of it was like a specter clinging to my every thought, and I couldn't help but wonder if these clues were mere coincidences or if someone, or something, was deliberately drawing me back into that dark labyrinth of secrets. As I continued toward the Keys, my isolation grew heavier with each passing mile. The once comforting solitude of the open road now felt oppressive, a silent companion to my spiraling thoughts. One evening, while idling at a rest stop on a deserted stretch of road, my CB radio crackled to life. At first, it was nothing more than the usual static, but then came a series of whispered messages. The voices were faint, almost drowned out by the static, yet they spoke in a tone that was both familiar and unnervingly personal. Details from my past fragments of the unsolved case and words of warning bled into the conversation. I listened, heart pounding, as the disembodied voices seemed to know things that no random chatter on the airwaves should. The further I drove, the more unsettling my journey became. In the early morning light, I encountered a solitary figure. On the side of the road, a man in a worn, tattered coat and a battered hat. He stood by the roadside for a long moment, his eyes fixed on something I couldn't quite discern. When I slowed down to greet him, he simply stared silently before vanishing into the heat-hazed distance. I couldn't shake the feeling that he was more than a mere wanderer. He was a living embodiment of the mysteries that had begun to haunt me. My RV, a sanctuary on wheels, gradually transformed from a comfortable refuge into a symbol of my mounting vulnerability. Mechanical glitches became frequent, and several times I found myself stranded on narrow, desolate roads with nothing but the humid, oppressive air for company. Each breakdown forced me to rely on my own wits and deep-seated determination to push forward. The relentless setbacks only deepened my suspicion that my journey was not merely a series of unfortunate accidents, but part of a larger, more deliberate design. One night, after days of restless travel, I pulled off near Bahia Honda State Park. The Keys, with their sun-soaked beaches and swaying palms, had a deceptive beauty that cloaked an undercurrent of decay and neglect. I set up camp in a secluded, coastal clearing, the salty air heavy with the tang of the sea and the faint odor of decay. Under a vast canopy of stars, I sat by a small, sputtering campfire, the cryptic note and the old photograph spread out before me on a weathered map. Every detail of the note tugged at the corners of my memory, hinting at a conspiracy I had once tried so hard to unravel, a network of secrets that extended far beyond the tragic end of my previous case. As the night deepened, I found myself unable to shake the feeling of being watched. The quiet was broken only by the whisper of the wind and the occasional rustle in the brush, sounds that seemed too deliberate to be the work of nature alone. I thought of the cryptic CB radio messages, the abandoned campsite, and the solitary figure I had seen earlier. Every piece of the puzzle hinted at a hidden hand guiding my steps, a force determined to force me to confront the ghosts of my past. The gentle hum of the Keys, usually a lullaby of calm nights, had turned into a sinister murmur that made my skin crawl. The next day dawned gray and overcast, the sky heavy with unspoken forebodings. I decided to press on, following a series of narrow, winding roads that led deeper into the heart of the Keys. The landscape was a jarring mix of vibrant natural beauty and eerie abandonment. Along the roadside, deserted motels and relics of bygone eras told stories of lives abruptly left behind. It was as if the very land was littered with echoes of secrets too painful to remember. I made frequent stops searching for clues, examining each abandoned sign and piece of detritus as if it were a part of a larger narrative meant for me alone. One stop led me to an old, run-down diner on the outskirts of a small coastal town. The diner, its windows streaked with the grime of neglect and time, seemed frozen in a bygone era. Inside, dust motes danced in the pale light that filtered through broken blinds, and a single, creaking chair sat at the counter. Behind the counter, an elderly fisherman with a face weathered by both sea and sorrow regarded me with cautious eyes. In a low, gravelly voice, he offered words of warning. Some things are best left buried, friend. You're chasing shadows that might just swallow you whole. His words echoed in my mind long after I left, a reminder that not all secrets are meant to be unearthed. Mechanically, my RV continued to defy me. In the midst of an unexpected thunderstorm one afternoon, as I was driving along a narrow coastal road, the RV sputtered and stalled completely. Rain pounded the roof, and I was forced to pull over on the side of the road, my heart sinking as I realized how isolated I was. The storm seemed to mock my plight, the downpour intensifying my sense of vulnerability. I huddled in the small cab, the roar of the wind and rain mingling with my racing thoughts. It was in that moment of helplessness that I realized my journey was not just a physical escape, but also a desperate attempt to outrun the demons of my past that had followed me relentlessly. After the storm passed, I resumed my journey with a renewed sense of determination, even as the evidence of the conspiracy I'd once pursued began to mount. Along a forgotten stretch of highway near an old coastal campsite, I found more clues. Among rusted camping, gear and tattered remnants of lives that had once teemed with hope, I discovered a scrap of paper with a series of numbers and letters that seemed to reference dates and names from my long-closed case. The realization struck me like a bolt of lightning. The case that had ruined my career might not have been an isolated tragedy after all, but part of a larger, far more sinister network of secrets. Haunted by these discoveries, I pressed on, my mind a turbulent mix of suspicion and determination. Every mile, every derelict building, every whispered message on the radio added another layer of dread to the fabric of my journey. I began to suspect that the mysterious figure I had encountered earlier was not a mere coincidence. His occasional appearances on the roadside, his silent, unsettling gaze, it all pointed to a connection with the network of secrets that had drawn me back into this painful past. Late one rainy night, while navigating a narrow, winding road through a particularly isolated area, I finally came face to face with him again. Under the weak glow of a solitary street lamp, the man in the tattered coat and battered hat stood motionless on the roadside. This time, there was no mistaking his presence. Our eyes met for what felt like an eternity. He said nothing. His silence was a weight more crushing than any accusation. I felt as if he was silently judging me, as if he carried the weight of every secret I had tried to forget. In that charged moment, I realized that his presence was a manifestation of the past I had hoped to leave behind, an ever-watchful guardian of secrets, or perhaps an emissary of those who wished the truth to remain hidden. The days that followed were a blur of relentless travel and mounting anxiety. I found myself drawn to a dilapidated warehouse on the outskirts of a small Keys town, a place that the cryptic note had mentioned in passing. The warehouse, cloaked in layers of neglect and time, exuded an air of menace. Its broken windows and sagging roof were silent witnesses to countless secrets, and as I stepped inside, the air grew cold and heavy. Every creak of the floor and every whisper of wind seemed to carry echoes of the past. It was here, amid the crumbling relics of a forgotten era, that I began to piece together the puzzle. Inside the warehouse, I discovered evidence that was both damning and deeply personal. Stacks of old documents, faded photographs, and a tattered ledger hinted at a clandestine network connected to the very case that had haunted me for so long. The more I uncovered, the clearer it became. My pursuit of the truth, which I had once believed to be a noble quest for justice, might have made me a target in a carefully orchestrated plot. The documents suggested that powerful individuals had conspired to bury the case, and that my relentless investigation had inadvertently stirred forces determined to keep their secrets hidden. The climax of my journey came in a moment of harrowing confrontation within that decrepit warehouse. As I sifted through the last of the records, footsteps echoed behind me. I turned slowly to see the man in the tattered coat standing in the doorway, his eyes dark and inscrutable. For a long, tense moment, the silence between us was thicker than any storm. He stepped forward, and I could see the faint glimmer of recognition in his gaze, a silent acknowledgement of the truth that was unfolding before us. The confrontation that followed was a tense, nerve-wracking dance of words and silences. I demanded answers, and in his measured, almost indifferent tone, he revealed fragments of a conspiracy that stretched far beyond the confines of my past case. He spoke of betrayal, of lives ruined in the pursuit of power, and of secrets that were never meant to see the light of day. The revelations shattered the remaining illusions I had clung to, exposing the raw, painful truth that my failure to solve the case had been just one thread in a vast, tangled web. In that dim, dust-laden warehouse, I was forced to confront not only the external threat posed by those who would silence the truth, but also the internal demons that had driven me. For years, the man's presence was both a warning and an invitation to acknowledge the past, to accept the guilt and regret that had haunted me, and to muster the courage to face a future where the line between truth and deception was irrevocably blurred. The confrontation was brutal and cathartic. In the aftermath, I staggered out of the warehouse forever altered. The enigmatic figure vanished as mysteriously as he had appeared, leaving behind a tangle of evidence that confirmed some of my worst fears while opening new, uncharted questions. By the time the early morning sun began to break through the dense canopy of the quays, I was driving away from that warehouse with a heavy heart and a mind racing with the implications of what I had learned. I realized that while I might have uncovered fragments of the truth, the deeper network of secrets was far larger and more dangerous than I had ever imagined. My journey had not provided the neat closure I had hoped for. Instead, it had forced me to confront a reality where the past was never truly behind us, and where redemption was a slow, uncertain process. Now, as I sit in the cab of my RV, its engine sputtering softly as it carries me along an empty stretch of road, I still feel the weight of those long, terrifying days. The cryptic messages on the CB radio, the abandoned sites, and the intermittent appearances of the mysterious figure have all left their mark on me. I sometimes catch myself glancing into the rearview mirror, half expecting to see that same figure standing silently in the distance, a reminder that the ghosts of my past are never far away. The Florida Keys with their sunlit vistas and shadowed secrets taught me that isolation can be both a refuge and a trap. I embarked on this journey seeking solace, only to find that the road to redemption is paved with both painful memories and dangerous revelations. Each mile I travel is a step toward understanding that some mysteries are destined to remain unsolved, that some wounds are too deep to ever fully heal. And yet I continue to drive, propelled by a need to keep moving forward despite the lingering dread and uncertainty. In the quiet moments of dawn, as I navigate the narrow, deserted roads and the rhythmic hum of the RV blends with the sound of my own thoughts, I accept that my journey is far from over. The evidence I uncovered in that forsaken warehouse, the warnings from a reclusive fisherman, and the spectral encounters along the way have all shown me that the truth is often a double-edged sword. It can set you free, but it can also chain you to a past you wish you could forget. Now, as I look out over the horizon where the sky meets the sea, I know that my search for answers has transformed me. I am no longer the man who left Miami in search of quiet redemption. I have become a man who understands that the past is a constant companion, one that must be faced with courage, however painful the truth may be. Even as I drive through the sun-dappled roads of the Keys, every shadow, every whisper of the wind seems to carry a reminder of that long, tumultuous journey. I am Miles Everett, a man haunted by memories and driven by the relentless pursuit of truth, even when that truth threatens to shatter the fragile boundaries between my past and present. My journey through the Florida Keys was not a neat, tidy story of redemption, but a labyrinth of broken clues, desperate encounters, and moments of piercing clarity that forced me to acknowledge the darkness within and without. As I continue on this uncertain road, I hold on to the knowledge that sometimes the very act of seeking the truth is both an act of bravery and a surrender to the forces that shape our lives, forces that remain as inscrutable and dangerous as the mysterious figure in a tattered coat, watching silently from the edges of memory and time. Even now, as the wheels of my old RV roll steadily over the worn asphalt, I am reminded that the search for closure is an endless journey, a journey where every mile brings you closer to understanding, yet also deeper into the mysteries of a world that never stops whispering secrets. And so, with the sun rising slowly in the distance, casting a golden glow over the keys. I press on, determined to face whatever shadows lie ahead, knowing that my past, with all its haunting truths, is inseparable from the man I have become. My name is Riley Quinn. I'm 29 years old, and this happened one sweltering August when I left Tallahassee behind in search of solitude and escape in the bayous of the Florida Panhandle. I had been a journalist once, an urban reporter who chased headlines and scandal, but after a crushing betrayal and a career that had left me disillusioned, I decided to trade the chaos of the city for the unpredictable wilds of the bayou. I packed my life into an old RV that I'd inherited from a distant relative, a creaking vessel that promised freedom on wheels, and set off toward a place known as Devil's Cradle, a remote area shrouded in local lore, where whispers of secretive cults and ritualistic mysteries still clung to the humid air. The journey began with an uneasy optimism. I remember driving out of Tallahassee under a relentless sun, the pavement shimmering in the heat. The RV's engine sputtered intermittently, a persistent reminder that this vehicle was as old and battered as my own hopes. The GPS, once a trusty guide, flickered and stuttered its directions as if it too was uncertain of the path ahead. I tried to brush off these mechanical hiccups as the natural wear and tear of time, but deep down, I felt that the universe was sending me subtle warnings. The miles accumulated. The scenery shifted from manicured cityscapes to lonely, winding backroads flanked by ancient cypress trees draped with Spanish moss. The roads became less traveled, the signs faded and rusted, and I began to notice odd markings along the roadside. Carved deep into the bark of trees were symbols I couldn't quite decipher, scratched shapes that might have been the work of locals or something far more sinister. I passed abandoned billboards with cryptic graffiti, and encountered scattered trinkets that looked disturbingly ritualistic, half-buried totems, broken charms, and fragments of what could have once been a ceremonial mask. It was on one such stretch of road that I stumbled upon a deserted campsite. The scene was both haunting and surreal. In a clearing surrounded by overgrown brush and gnarled trees, an old RV lay abandoned, its metal frame rusted and overtaken by nature. Nearby, on a splintered wooden post, a handwritten note in shaky, almost frantic script caught my eye. It read, "Don't follow the whispers after dusk." I clutched the note in my hand, feeling a cold shiver crawl up my spine. I couldn't decide if it was a desperate warning left by someone who had once sought refuge here, or a cryptic message from a mind unraveling in solitude. Either way, it struck a chord within me, a reminder that some secrets are best left undisturbed. That night, I parked the RV on a small patch of relatively dry ground near Devil's Cradle. The air was thick with the scent of wet earth and decaying. Vegetation and the oppressive humidity seemed to press in on all sides. Inside the RV, I tried to convince myself that I was alone, that the isolation would be a balm for my wounded spirit. But as dusk deepened into night, the familiar sounds of the bayou began to intrude. There was a constant low murmur, a sound that seemed to rise and fall like the steady breathing of the swamp itself. And every so often, if I strained my ears, I could catch the faintest echo of chanting, as if carried on the wind from some unseen gathering, far beyond the reach of my little sanctuary. I spent that first night wide awake, eyes fixed on the darkened windows, listening for any sign that the murmurs were more than just the natural chorus of nocturnal creatures. The RV's interior, once a safe cocoon, felt claustrophobic and vulnerable. I kept checking the engine and the dashboard, half expecting the flickering lights to signal something more ominous than mere malfunction. Every creak of the metal, every rustle of wind outside, sent a spike of adrenaline through me. It was as if the bayou itself was alive with secrets, and I had unwittingly become its newest audience. The following morning, with a heavy sense of unease clinging to me like a second skin, I set out on foot along a narrow, muddy trail. I had heard local legends that a waterway ran directly from Devil's Cradle, a route steeped in superstition and whispered about by those who still lived in the fringes of society. My boots sank into the soft, wet ground as I walked along the edge of a slow-moving stream. Along the way, I discovered more relics of the past. A half-buried lantern whose glass was cracked, a few broken pieces of what might have been a ceremonial mask, and even a faded journal page tucked into the crevice of a large rock. The page mentioned the Gathering and the Keeper, terms that instantly ignited memories of a story I had once pursued before my life unraveled. The discovery was both exhilarating and deeply unsettling. It was as if someone had been waiting for me to find these clues. Days passed in a blur of restless travel and mounting paranoia. The more I explored, the more I began to feel the weight of unseen eyes tracking my every step. Every rustle in the underbrush, every movement in the corner of my vision, sent me into a state of hypervigilance. At times, I questioned whether the isolation was causing my mind to play tricks on me, but the evidence around me was too tangible to dismiss. I was not alone in the bayou. There were echoes of a past that refused to fade, voices that seemed to call out my name on the wind, and shadows that moved with a purpose of their own. One particularly sweltering afternoon, as I navigated a twisting road lined with dense foliage, the RV's persistent mechanical problems came to a head. In the middle of a narrow, secluded stretch of road, the engine sputtered violently and died. Rain had begun to fall in a sudden, torrential downpour, and I found myself stranded on the side of the road, the RV reduced to a lifeless hulk. The sound of the rain against the metal was almost mocking in its intensity, and I sat there for what felt like hours, drenched and desperate, trying to coax the engine back to life with nothing more than a few basic tools and a stubborn determination. As the storm raged, I took shelter in the RV, my thoughts swirling as wildly as the water outside. The thunder and rain became a backdrop to a cacophony of inner voices, memories of past betrayals, echoes of journalistic failures, and the overwhelming sense that I was being drawn inexorably toward something I couldn't quite name. In that moment of isolation, the bayou seemed to communicate with me directly, each malfunction of the RV a deliberate message, each creak of its frame a reminder of the ancient, unyielding force that lay beyond the flimsy walls of my temporary refuge. Once the storm passed, I resumed my journey, my heart heavier and my resolve more determined than ever. Following a narrow, overgrown path that twisted through dense, humid vegetation, I eventually found myself at the outskirts of a dilapidated shack hidden deep within the swamp. The structure, barely standing and overtaken by nature, exuded an aura of decay and desolation. The wood was splintered and blackened by time, and the door hung loosely on its hinges. I hesitated for a moment, my intuition warning me of potential danger, but the lure of answers was too strong to ignore. Inside the shack, the air was stale and thick with dust. I rummaged through a few old trunks and boxes that had been left behind, my flashlight revealing stacks of faded photographs, yellowed documents, and objects that seemed to belong to a forgotten ritual. Among these items, I found a leather-bound journal. Its pages were filled with hurried, spidery handwriting that detailed the inner workings of a clandestine cult that once gathered in this very region. The journal spoke of secret ceremonies, held under a blood-red moon, of an enigmatic figure known only as the Keeper, and of a promise of power that came at a terrible price. The more I read, the more I realized that Devil's Cradle was not merely a local legend, but a nexus of dark, unresolved energy, a place where the boundaries between the natural and the supernatural blurred. That night, back at the RV, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. The familiar sounds of the bayou had taken on a more sinister tone. Between the constant murmur of water and the occasional rustle of leaves, I distinctly heard what could only be described as chanting, a low rhythmic incantation that seemed to seep through the walls of the RV. I lay awake in the darkness, heart pounding, the journal's words echoing in my mind. I felt as if I were standing at the threshold of a revelation, one that might expose secrets too dark for the daylight. It wasn't long before the inevitable confrontation came. On a humid evening, with the moon casting a ghostly glow over the murky waters, I decided to follow the sound of the chanting. I left the relative safety of the RV and ventured out on foot along a narrow trail that led me closer to a clearing near the edge of a stagnant pond. The path was overgrown and slippery, each step a reminder that I was trespassing into territory that belonged to something far older and more powerful than I could ever comprehend. As I neared the clearing, the chanting grew louder, a hypnotic cadence that resonated with every fiber of my being. I crouched behind a thick clump of reeds, straining my eyes against the dim light. In the center of the clearing, a circle of flickering torches revealed a gathering of hooded figures. Their faces were hidden in shadow, but their posture and the measured rhythm of their chants spoke of a collective purpose, a ritual that had been repeated time and again under the watchful gaze of the bayou. And there, standing at the very center of the circle, was the keeper. He was an imposing figure, draped in a dark, flowing robe that seemed to absorb the moonlight, his face partially obscured by a hood. But what struck me most were his eyes, deep, unyielding, and unnervingly familiar, as if they carried the weight of centuries. For a moment, our eyes met, and in that silent exchange I felt as though he could see into the very depths of my soul. The chanting faltered, and for several agonizing seconds time itself seemed to pause. I was frozen in place, a spectator to a scene that defied all logic and reason. Then, as if the connection had been broken by an unseen force, the ritual resumed with even greater intensity. My heart hammered in my chest, and I knew that I had trespassed too deeply into a world of secrets and ancient rites. I retreated hastily into the darkness, every step echoing with the sound of my own terror. I ran until the sound of the chanting faded into the distance, until all that remained was the relentless beating of my heart and the chill of the night air on my skin. In the aftermath of that harrowing encounter, I found myself trapped in a vortex of conflicting emotions. I had uncovered fragments of a mystery that threatened to shatter the fragile reality I had built for myself. The documents, the journal, and the ominous warnings I had encountered all pointed to a hidden world that existed parallel to my own, a world where ancient rituals and dark secrets were not just stories, but living, breathing truths. I was both terrified and inexplicably drawn to it, compelled by a need to understand and perhaps even to expose the forces that had turned my quiet escape into a descent into darkness. Over the next several days, I oscillated between a desperate desire to flee and an unyielding need to uncover the truth. I spent long hours poring over the journal I had found, retracing the cryptic notes and half-forgotten references to the gathering and the keeper. Each page was a step deeper into a labyrinth of esoteric symbolism and foreboding promises. I began to piece together the puzzle, connecting the scattered clues I had collected along the road with the eerie phenomena I had witnessed. The abandoned campsite, the strange carvings on trees, and the unsettling encounters, all of it pointed to a deliberate design, as if someone or something wanted me to find these messages. Every night, as I sat in the dim glow of the RV's interior, the bayou outside seemed to breathe with a life of its own. The gentle hum of insects and the distant call of unseen creatures blended with my own restless thoughts. I couldn't help but feel that I was being followed, that the very shadows were alive with the secrets of Devil's Cradle. In the back of my mind, the warning from that old, tattered note, "Don't follow the whispers after dusk," reverberated like a curse. Yet I pressed on, driven by a determination born of both fear and the need for closure. Eventually, I decided that I could not simply run away from the truth. With trembling hands and a resolve steeled by the nights of terror and introspection, I set out to confront the mystery head-on. I retraced the path that led me to the ritual clearing, determined to observe, if not to intervene, the gathering once more. This time I moved with a careful stealth born of desperation, each step measured and silent. I found a vantage point hidden among a cluster of cypress trees, their gnarled limbs shrouded in Spanish moss. There, I watched as the hooded figures assembled again, this time with a solemnity that chilled me to the bone. The keeper appeared once more at the center of the circle, his presence commanding and his eyes glowing with an intensity that defied explanation. The ritual that unfolded was both mesmerizing and horrifying, a dance of shadows and flame, where each chant seemed to summon memories of long-dead souls and promises of forbidden power. In that moment, I understood that the cult, of Devil's Cradle was more than a group of superstitious locals. They were custodians of secrets that spanned generations, protectors of a dark legacy that had taken root in the very heart of the bayou. I felt a profound conflict tearing at me. Part of me wanted to run, to abandon this labyrinth of mystery and terror. Yet another part demanded that I uncover the truth, to expose the hidden hand that had been guiding these events all along. I began to record what I saw with my phone, my hands shaking as I tried to capture every detail. I knew that if I could piece together enough evidence, perhaps I could not only escape with my sanity intact, but also bring to light the mysteries that had so haunted my journey. But fate, it seems, had other plans. As the ritual drew to a close, and the hooded figures began to disperse into the inky blackness of the bayou, I felt a cold, heavy presence behind me. I spun around, heart in my throat, to see the enigmatic keeper standing just a few paces away. His eyes met mine again, and in that silent, charged moment I sensed an unspoken question in his gaze, a query about my own purpose, my own pain, and my own place in the tangled web of secrets that surrounded us. For several long, agonizing seconds we stood there, two solitary souls on opposite sides of a vast, impenetrable gulf of mystery. Then without a word he turned and disappeared into the darkness, leaving me trembling and more determined than ever to follow the trail of clues he had inadvertently set before me. I returned to my RV. The images of that night burned into my memory. The evidence I had gathered, the journal, the photographs, the cryptic symbols etched into the trees, formed a tapestry of mystery that I knew would haunt me for years to come. I spent the following days repairing the RV as best as I could, all the while planning my next move. I knew that if I were to survive this ordeal, I would need to confront the cult head-on, to learn the secrets they guarded so jealously, and to understand why my life had been inextricably drawn into their dark ritual. Leaving the safety of the road behind, I began to document every detail of my journey. I interviewed local residents, piecing together fragmented stories of disappearances, strange sightings, and ominous warnings. Every whispered tale confirmed that Devil's Cradle was a place where the natural and the supernatural intertwined, a realm where ancient powers still held sway over the living. The locals spoke in hushed tones of the cult, of the keeper, and of a legacy of rituals that had been passed down through generations. Their eyes were haunted by memories of those who had dared to pry too deeply into the bayou's secrets. Their voices trembling as they recounted incidents that defied rational explanation. I realized then that my journey was far from over. The evidence, the warnings, and the spectral presence of the keeper had all pointed to a deeper mystery, a hidden network of power and fear that extended far beyond the confines of a remote swamp. And so, with a mix of dread and determination, I vowed to see it through, to uncover the truth no matter the cost. In the following days, I managed to gather enough evidence to piece together a partial picture of the cult's inner workings. I discovered that they believed in a cyclical ritual meant to appease an ancient spirit, one that was said to govern the very life force of the bayou. The keeper was not merely a leader. He was seen as a conduit between the physical world and a darker realm, a man who carried the weight of the cult's sins and secrets. The journal I had found described his rise to power and the sacrifices made to maintain the delicate balance between nature and the unseen forces that lurked beneath the water's surface. Armed with this newfound understanding, I began to prepare for one final, decisive encounter. I reloaded my phone with the recordings and photos I had taken, determined to document the next gathering, to capture irrefutable evidence of the cult's activities. That night, under a sky heavy with storm clouds and an eerie, predatory stillness, I set out once more into the heart of the bayou. I left the RV parked in a secluded clearing and ventured into the darkness, guided only by the distant sound of chanting and the pull of my own curiosity. The path was treacherous, a narrow trail winding through marshy undergrowth and over hidden pools of stagnant water. Every step was a test of my resolve as the oppressive humidity and the omnipresent sounds of the bayou closed in around me. Eventually, I reached a familiar clearing where the torches had burned before, where the hooded figures had gathered in a ritual of ancient incantations. This time, however, I was not a hidden observer. I was a determined participant in a story that had long been unfolding, one in which I was destined to play a part. I crouched behind a thick clump of cypress trees, my heart pounding as I watched the figures assemble. The atmosphere was thick with anticipation, each flickering flame casting grotesque shadows on the ground. Then, as if on cue, the keeper emerged once again, his presence commanding silence. My hands trembled as I held my phone, recording every moment, every sound. I was so intent on capturing the truth that I almost failed to notice the subtle shift in the air, the way the very ground seemed to vibrate with a low, rhythmic pulse, as if the bayou itself was awakening to our intrusion. Before I could fully comprehend what was happening, the chanting reached a fevered pitch. In the center of the circle, the keeper began to speak in a language that was not entirely human, words that resonated with the power of ancient incantations. The hooded figures moved in unison, their gestures precise and purposeful. I felt an overwhelming sense of dread mixed with awe as the ritual unfolded before me. It was a moment that defied explanation, a convergence of faith, fear, and the unyielding force of nature itself. Then, amidst the chaos of sound and movement, I saw a flash of movement behind me. I turned slowly, my pulse racing, to see the enigmatic figure of a man standing at the edge of the clearing. His eyes, dark and penetrating, met mine for a brief, terrifying moment before he melted back into the shadows. I couldn't tell if he was one of them or an outsider, an interloper like me drawn to the bayou's dark secrets. But his presence confirmed what I had long suspected. I was not alone in my pursuit of the truth, and the forces at work here were more complex and dangerous than I could have ever imagined. As the ritual drew to a close, the hooded figures began to disperse one by one, their footsteps silent on the soft, moss-covered ground. The keeper lingered a moment longer, his eyes locked on the spot where I had hidden. For a heartbeat, time seemed to slow, and I felt as if my very soul was being weighed. Then, without a word, he turned and vanished into the night, leaving me alone with the echo of his gaze and the burden of what I had witnessed. I made my way back to the RV under a sky now clearing to a dim, uncertain dawn. The evidence I had collected was overwhelming, a tapestry of secrets, rituals, and warnings that confirmed the existence of a hidden world within the bayou. As I drove away from Devil's Cradle, the twisted silhouettes of the cypress trees receded into the distance, but the memories of that night, the haunting chants, and the unyielding stare of the keeper remained with me, a permanent scar on my soul. Now, as I sit in the worn cab of my RV, the engine once again humming steadily beneath me, I reflect on the journey that led me here. The bayou taught me that solitude is a double-edged sword, a refuge from the world's chaos, yet a gateway into the heart of mysteries that refuse to be forgotten. I left Tallahassee seeking escape and solace, only to find that the secrets of Devil's Cradle had intertwined with my own haunted past, compelling me to confront truths that I had long tried to bury. I am still driven by the need to understand, to document, and to expose the hidden layers of the world that exist just beyond the veil of everyday life. The memory of the keeper's gaze, the sound of ancient chants, and the cryptic messages left on decaying wood remind me that some forces are as old as the land itself, untamed, unyielding, and forever intertwined with the fate of those who dare to seek them out. Every time I travel these winding roads, every time I see a symbol carved into a tree or a message scrawled on a forgotten sign, I am reminded that the bayou is alive with secrets. And though I sometimes wish I could leave that part of myself behind, I know that I will never be the same. The experience has changed me, etched into my memory a reminder that the search for truth is often a journey into darkness, a darkness that sometimes gazes back with eyes that see right through you. I am Riley Quinn, and though I have escaped the immediate grasp of Devil's Cradle, its shadows follow me still. The road ahead is uncertain, and the secrets of the bayou continue to whisper on the wind. I drive on, recording my journey, piecing together the fragments of a mystery that spans generations. And in every quiet moment, I remember that some truths are best discovered in the silence of the night, under a sky filled with both stars and the lingering specters of an ancient, unspoken ritual. The memory of those nights, The relentless cadence of the chants and the enigmatic eyes of the keeper remain with me, fueling my determination to uncover the secrets that lie hidden beneath the moss and water of the bayou. And as I navigate these lonely roads in my battered RV, I know that the search for understanding and for redemption will continue, a journey that is as perilous as it is necessary. Even now, when I catch a glimpse of a shadow moving where no one should be or hear a whisper in the rustling leaves, I am transported back to that haunting clearing, to the ritual that forced me to confront the darkness both outside and within. The bayou taught me that isolation can be both a sanctuary and a snare, and that sometimes the price of uncovering a hidden truth is to carry its weight forever. I have become a reluctant guardian of these secrets, an unwilling chronicler of a world where the line between the natural and the supernatural is as thin and elusive as the morning mist over Devil's Cradle. My journey through the bayou has left me forever changed. I continue to drive, I continue to search for answers, and every mile brings with it both the hope of understanding and the lingering dread of what I might yet uncover. The bayou's whispers follow me along every winding road, a constant reminder that some secrets never truly fade. They only wait, patiently, for someone brave or foolish enough to listen. And so, with the RV's engine humming steadily as I press on into the uncertain future, I carry with me the memory of those dark nights, the echo of ancient chants, and the unmistakable presence of a keeper whose eyes still haunt the edges of my vision. I am Riley Quinn, a wanderer in a world where the shadows speak, and I know that as long as I travel these forgotten roads, the secrets of Devil's Cradle will remain an indelible part of who I am.